Okay, it's me, James, and I'm here with another Dice Masters Chronicle, the third episode in a series of videos in which I'm trying to sort of track the Dice Masters meta, the big teams that win tournaments, or almost win tournaments. And today we're going to talk about the God Catcher, which a while back did very well in the Earth X Origins tournament with Alan Aycock, but more recently has been taken by one Patrick Barley, aka Shadowmeld, and I'm very honoured to have that gentleman here with me today. Hello, Patrick.
Hey, how's it going?
Okay, that's the second time Patrick's asked me, and I still don't quite know how to respond to that, but everything's good.
Perfect.
Yes, so you created a monster, Patrick, from the God Catcher, and you're here to tell us about that. So over to you. How did this all come about?
So, okay, short answer. The entire reason this team exists is because all the other teams that I was planning around, I was trying to do, massive control teams where I wanted to like stop my opponent from doing all these things. And every time that happened, my opponent would buy an action die and it would ruin my plans and I'd be done because I have no way to control the action die. And this team exists because there is zero action die control in the meta. And so this team is here to abuse that specific niche in the meta. That if all I do is buy action dice, you can't control me. You can just hope not to die.
and abuse is what it does very well indeed. Take us through the team, Patrick. So obviously the 3-cost God Catcher. I would imagine that everybody knows what that does, but if you don't, basically you put it in the field. It's a continuous action die, and then when you use any other kind of action die, that triggers the effect, which is to put a 10 attack, 10 defense God Catcher token in the field, which has the ability when the God Catcher attacks, target character die must block this turn if able.
So the fact that it's 10 instead of 9 means I only have to do my tricks 2 times. And that is why this team gets to go as quickly and fast as it does, because I only have to line up 2 successful attacks.
So action dice are currently unstoppable, and God Catcher can do it in 2 hits. That's why God Catcher, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so how did you support the God Catcher?
Well, the worst thing for God Catcher is if your opponent can just spend a minute amount of resources to stop your 10-10. And the easiest resources to do that are like globals that stop your God Catcher from doing 10 whole damage. Mm-hmm. Everything from Static Field or Kang or what have you. So we used Nefarious Broadcast.
There it is. In all its beauty, it's a lovely looking card as well.
Yep. And the couple things that Broadcast does is Broadcast is a way of stopping globals before I pass priority. So things like Eddie that have to attack to stop globals, or Istrid Horn that only stops 1 global. We chose to Broadcast for, again, 2 reasons. 1, it's an action die, so nobody can stop it. And 2, it happens before you pass priority and it hits everything, right? So it's area of effect and it happens before you pass priority. Those being the weaknesses of the other 2 global denying cards, Istrid Horn and Eddie Guerrera.
Yep.
So Nefarious Broadcast, and frankly, it does more than that against teams that want to bring ramp or teams that want to use the ramp we brought. Specifically, you'll see Clayface. Nefarious Broadcast makes them try to save the energy and then denies them the ability to use that energy to ramp.
It's such a horrible card.
This card is the modern version of Prismatic Spray back in the days of Professor Xavier, right?
And it costs 2.
And it costs 2, which costing 2 is a really significant thing. We'll get to that in a minute, but it only costs 2.
It's like I can do this, that, and the other. I can do a bit of Clayface, I can do a bit of this, and then, oh look, I've got Nefarious Broadcast, you can't do any of that stuff.
Exactly.
Lovely.
So this acts as economy disruption, energy denial, and then also just lockdown.
Okay, so far we have 2 action dice. What's next?
I think we have, what is it, Storm next?
I think Thor. Spoilers.
Yes,
Storm's coming. But
Thor is next.
Yep.
So sometimes Godcatcher can get countered. So it's good to have a secondary win condition. It's also really good when that secondary win condition helps you buy your first win condition for cheaper. So the Thor Global lets us get a Godcatcher for 2 bolts, which 2 is much cheaper than 3.
Yep.
Like 50% cheaper even. Thor is a great win condition, but we're not a Thor team. Let nobody try to convince you that we are a Thor team. The only time Thor is a good purchase on this team is when your opponent buys all of their Godcatcher counter pieces instead of their win conditions.
Even then, I couldn't bring myself to do it. But apparently, you had quite some success against, for example, Peter.
Yeah, at the UKGE, I had 2 Thor games. So we had 3 Godcatcher rounds where Godcatcher just stomped, and then I had 2 Thor games where Thor did really well in the first one, and then Thor did okay in the second one, and that's why we got second instead of third, because it was kind of a Thor mirror match, and their Thor was better than our Thor, right?
Yeah.
So not a Thor team. Don't let anybody pretend that we are, but there are times where you can buy this Thor and win the game against, horrible, terrible things that make Godcatchers squeal in their boots, like Yellow Lantern Ring or a million gazers. That's when you go get a Thor, because our Godcatchers can't combo out to do like 4 10-10 tokens in one turn. It requires some setup. Yeah. And if they're bouncing a removal counter card every turn, then Godcatcher's just too slow.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we've got Thor, and next was Spoiler Storm. Why Storm?
Well, I said we could buy a Godcatcher for 2 bolts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Storm is 2 bolts. You can buy Storm for 1 bolt, and then if you could say magically make that Storm appear in your reserve pool on a double volt face, you can then buy a Godcatcher. So even if you land only a single bolt on the first turn, as long as you land a mask to Clayface and then another energy, you can buy the Storm, Clayfacer out, and still guarantee to buy at least 1 Godcatcher on the first turn. So all you would need is 1 bolt and 1 mask and any other energy to be able to get a Godcatcher and another die on the first turn.
Yep, and she's got great fielding. And she has a handy-dandy ability. When fielded, you may re-roll target action die in your reserve pool on an action or energy phase, but you cannot re-roll an energy die that has been partially spent, obviously.
And there are 2 reasons that ability is super useful. Step 1, I missed my Godcatcher. Let me field my Storm and re-roll the Godcatcher I missed.
Yep.
Step 2, I have all this energy. I have my Godcatchers in the field, but they have too many blockers. Great. Let me buy my Villainous Pact and then Clayface it into my reserve pool.
Oh, no. God, I didn't even think of that.
And then field Storm to roll the Villainous Pact on turn 4. You weren't expecting it. You're dead.
Ooh, I like that. Spoilers for Villainous Pact. That's coming. Right. Okay. So it works a bit like parallaxing.
Yes, she gives you a 1-turn chance at a parallax. And here's the big thing, right?
Clever.
Here's the big thing. If you do land energy on that Villainous Pact, you can use that energy to ramp. So even if you miss this strategy, right? Even if you completely, utterly fail at doing this particular strategy, you can still use the energy from her ability without feeling too far behind. Yep. So the downsides on her are very, very slim.
Yeah. I should point out to the listeners that I stole Patrick's team and ran it in Roll for the North, just tweaking 1 card, which was actually this card. But and I did okay, but hearing Patrick talk about it, I clearly have missed some of the subtleties of the team. I didn't play it. I only played it a little bit. But
Yeah.
there are some great things here that I hadn't even noticed about the team that I played. So good job.
And you actually did better than me. But I will say we faced each other in the final round, right? I don't know how much of this is spoilers for people, but if you're looking for a team summary for a team, hopefully you're up to date on what the event was. And you got second place in that tournament because you 2-0'd me. If I had inversely 2-0'd you, I went and I checked. I checked all the tiebreakers all the way down the list. If I had 2-0'd you, I would have gotten second place. So this team would have gotten second place one way or the other unless we traded 2-1 instead of 2-0. So either way, the team did really well.
Yeah, it did. Props to the team, which you designed. I just stole it.
I mean, you had to have run it at least somewhat well.
Yeah, I'm semi-competent, I would say. But like I say, there definitely are things like that. Clayfacing and then using her to reroll is I didn't notice that. That's a good one. Although to be fair, she wasn't on my team because this is the card that I swapped out, but we'll come to that later. Next, let's push on to the next card, which I think is Hawkeye. Yay.
Godcatcher wants to hit your opponent in the face, and your opponent is like the way we have it set up. Godcatcher's likely to be in the field, ready to swing and hit your opponent on turn 3, right?
Yep.
Turn 3, I'm hitting you for 10 or 20 damage, unless you block. Well, the easiest way to get rid of the blockers that might exist on turn 3, because if my opponent has, if I'm going first and I'm ready to swing with 20 damage on turn 3, my opponent hasn't even had a turn 3 with which to field characters. So all they have is sidekicks, right?
Yep.
And if I can just pay 1 bolt, KO a sidekick.
Nice. Victory,
right? 1 bolt. And apparently this team likes bolts. So I'm probably going to have extra bolts at some point. I
noticed that you had 4 dice on him. Did you ever buy him?
No, I didn't. But I theory crafted when I would buy it. And that is when we transitioned to a Thor team. If for some reason I was getting a bajillion energy, I would buy a Hawkeye, and he's inexpensive to field. Field him with Thor, and when you do that, Hawkeye deals damage equal to his level. So if Thor is out and I field a Hawkeye, that one character is going to end up netting 3 to 5 damage to my opponent's face.
Yeah, that is pretty good.
And in a strategy where we're trying to field characters to outrace things that the Godcatcher can't get around, 3 to 5 means I'm only hitting 7 to 4 times. You know, we were talking Godcatcher only has to hit twice, right? 7 to 4 times. And in Thor, you know, if I have to buy a 6 and a 5 and then just field it 4 times, that's entirely doable.
Yep. Yeah, I had something similar with the Thor team with the Jubilee, but their fielding costs were awful. Hawkeye's got really good stats, hasn't he? Shame he costs 5. But, okay. Hawkeye, next one up is Scott Hall, NWO founder, who's cross bolts, but I don't think that's important. The global says pay a bolt, target superstar, die, must attack this turn.
Absolutely. Yeah, spoiler, cross pulse, his cross pulse does nothing to help the Godcatcher because it can't spin up. And you're almost rarely going to cross pulse it just to make your Thor bigger. Like, that just seems not likely. No. But he is a force attack bolt global, right? He's the Phoenix global from AVX. I can ping off sidekicks with Hawkeye. I cannot ping off the big characters. Yep. So they kind of go hand in hand. In order to clear the field on turn, say your opponent went first, and they actually got to play a character on turn 3. Well, if I saved a bolt, I can force it off, and so it doesn't matter what they landed. They can land their Big E or their Drax or their whatever character on the first turn or on the third turn, right? The first real turn of the game. and then I can force it out. And as long as that character comes through, I can take as much damage as I want because I only have to hit you twice. You have to hit me how many times? Right?
You're a horrible man, Patrick. There's nothing worse than force attacking when you've got you've got your really good. Maybe you've even Becky'd it across. So you've gone. Maybe you have gone second, but you have got a character in the field. Yeah, and then you just lose it to a bolt because you forgot.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm trading 1 energy for the character that you probably fielded for 1 energy.
Yeah.
And sure, I'm taking the damage. You're getting closer to winning. Great. But to go back to Hawkeye for a second, the difference is characters your opponent can't field except on their turn. So Scott Hall's great for getting their characters off the field on their turn. But during their turn, sometimes they can make sidekicks. Mm-hmm. So it's great that Hawkeye is on the team and not just Scott Hall, right? Because and Hawkeye also has the advantage of, I didn't expect you to roll 4 sidekicks this turn. I didn't save enough bolts to force all your guys off. Mm-hmm. And now I have to wait to try to hope to force your guys off again later. And then you get another chance to roll 4 more sidekicks or whatever, what have you. So you can fall behind with Scott Hall if you're trying to use Scott Hall exclusively to just kind of get rid of all the sidekicks and all the blockers. But Hawkeye lets you catch back up. Like you can invest an entire turn just pinging off sidekicks if you need to, because it'll win you the game.
It's super cool.
So,
and it gets around the people, annoying people who use Collector Global and your own Atlantis Global, spoilers, to field sidekicks when you've got nothing in the field. Aha, I have a sidekick. Aha, I've got Hawkeye Global. Bye-bye.
Right.
I'm sure people are going to listen to us thinking we're a horrible pair of people. Ooh, it's flashing.
I mean, I try. I try to be horrible.
I think we both try quite hard. Okay, so Scott Hall, pretty nasty. Next, Supreme Intelligence, Assimilated Hive Mind.
So we talked about Nefarious Grodd costing 2, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was important.
That was important. And we talked about Storm costing 2, right?
Yep.
Both of those are amazing dice to move over with Supreme Intelligence.
Whose global says, I shall read it for those who can't read it, pay 2 generic energy once per turn, and that's not limited to your turn, but can also be in your opponent's. Move a die with purchase cost 2 or less from your used pile to your prep area.
So we buy, let's just say first turn we buy a Storm, and then Clayface are out, and then buy a Godcatcher. If we went second, we can do all of that for 3 energy, and if we have an extra mask, not only were we able to buy a Storm and a Godcatcher on turn 1, but then we can Clayface the Storm back out on our opponent's turn. Or I'm sorry, Clayface the Godcatcher out on our opponent's turn, and then pay 2 to move the Storm to prep. So that we're rolling 4 sidekicks and a Storm on turn 2 to guarantee that we're going to get the other Godcatcher and the broadcast and to prep it all, so that we can annihilate our opponent on turn 3, and probably even keep a bolt after that to like Clayface the Storm back out to bolts after that,
and you have enough
to be able to force attack and ping off a dude with Hawkeye and Scott Hall.
And you have enough tools that you can pretty much always fix your bag, so you've got the right number of dice going into it. So you've got five dice going in when you're using Villainous Pact, for example.
Right, and Supreme Intelligence, you would not believe the number of times where I rolled a really horrible fist turn or a shield turn, and I'm like, well, worst case, I can use this 2 crappy energy to move even just a sidekick to the prep area.
Yeah, right.
Just moving 1 die over the prep area, although preferably it's a broadcast or a Storm, moving them over because they're super strong.
Yeah, it's a little bit like back in the day with PXG, as you mentioned, Prismatic Spray. Just keeping that Prismatic Spray every turn. I mean, in the past it was so your opponent couldn't use PXG, but now facing one of those nefarious broadcasts every turn is pretty oppressive, I think.
Yeah. And especially if you were planning on using globals for economy or defense on your own main step, on your opponent's turn, like the broadcast can be pretty devastating.
Nasty. Okay, let's push on. We've got a few more cards left on your team, and then we're going to talk about counters and other possibilities that you might change. So the next one here is Clayface, which we've already mentioned. The global is pay a mask. Once per turn, you may take a die from your used pile and add it to your reserve pool on any energy face. Ah, the power of Clayface, yes.
Yeah, especially with Supreme Intelligence, you know, one mask means you now have 2 energy, which means you're paying Supreme Intelligence's cost for 1 mask, right? One mask can effectively Supreme Intelligence for 1, which means you're paying 1 to prep a die, which is what Villainous Pact and Resurrection and Atlas do, right? It's 1 energy, prep 1 die. So him plus those 2 characters plus Supreme Intelligence means you're there. It's going, it's churning. And so you can Clayface out your Godcatcher on your opponent's turn, right? The Godcatcher you just turned into a token. You can Clayface that out to double bolts, which either gives you 2 Scott Hall force attacks, a Scott Hall force attack, a Hawkeye bolt thing, or a Supreme Intelligence. So Clayfacing into double bolts becomes viable. A lot of teams will look at Clayface and be like, oh, it's only good for mass characters. But in this team, because we have so many good bolt globals that we can use on our opponent's turn, and because we have Supreme Intelligence and a couple good 2 costs that we want on our team, we can Clayface out and then either ramp ourselves during our opponent's turn to fix our bag or what have you, or still threaten lethal or prevent lethal, right? Like if our opponent's playing a strategy where a sidekick is going to deal damage to us, or they have a character that is going to stop us from attacking, we can force that a character to attack and then block with one of our Godcatchers and thus kill things that are threatening us, right?
And because the tools on your team help you to keep your bag straight and in order, you almost always have access to some dice in your use pile, which if you didn't have those tools, you might find that you wanted to Clayface something and you don't have anything in the use pile, which is very annoying. But yes, very strong. Next one, Atlantis, City and Stronghold. Global says, pay a fist and a shield, move a sidekick die from your used pile to your prep area, field a different sidekick die from your used pile. And it does have the action is probably somewhat relevant. Move any number of dice you roll during your roll and reroll step from your reserve pool to your prep area. And on the burst or double burst, you also prep a die from your bag. Tell us about that, Patrick.
Short answer, I hate this card. It should not be on my team. Like, I love the card, don't get me wrong. It's absolutely terrible on this team. But at the same time, it's the best card to fill the slot. Because if we do get fists or shields, we don't have anything to spend it on, right? Other than the Supreme Intelligence Global. And if we want to thin our bag, we need a way to like get some sidekicks and prep some die. So this is 2 energy, take 2 dice out of circulation, which a 1-for-1 taking dice out of circulation is about as good as we can find in Modern right now. So having this global around is great. Some people would be like, oh, why don't you have like Clayface or the Collector? Because then it's 1-for-1 to take sidekicks out, but you only actually need 1 energy. And the answer is because I don't want my opponent to make that many sidekicks. I want them prepping a die instead of fielding an extra sidekick. And I want them to have really weird energy that very specifically they can't pay masks for, because apparently paying for globals with masks is
that's the thing, isn't it?
is pure magic in the current meta. Like, seriously, you take damage because somebody's casting magic at you. So this was not a mask global. It was able to move 2 sidekicks out of circulation, thus managing my bag a lot better. And in a clutch situation, I could buy it on the first turn if I missed masks or bolts. And it's a 2 cost. So I can still do all the things that 2 costs would normally be able to do for me on the first turn. And because it's an econ action, right? If I bought it early, I could use it to catch up, hopefully, to catch up and ramp really hard so that I can line up my 2 God Catchers and my Nefarious Broadcast and my Villainous Pact or whatever my win condition is. So I can line all that all up at the same turn.
Yeah, I think it's quite.
Dice.
I think that's not to be underrated, really, because having to line up action dice is notoriously difficult because they don't hang around in the field for you to KO at the right moment, so you can use them next turn. You have to cycle them, and then you have to hit the rolls, and sometimes you don't. And if one of the dice that you're rolling is Atlantis, and that is the one that rolls to an action phase, and your 2 God Catchers don't, you can put your God Catchers into the prep area and have another go next turn. Which I found quite reassuring. And also, it's if you don't need Nefarious Broadcast because your opponent doesn't have something like Static Field, then you could buy Atlantis, especially if you hit the wrong energy, and it almost always triggers because of the nature of it. You can probably always spare one of your sidekicks to put in prep, or even
on burst or double burst.
Indeed, you don't need to. So I found it. Yeah, I would swap it out, but I did think it had its charm, both in the global and the action.
Yeah, I like I said, I just couldn't find anything better.
Yeah.
It's. I think I've said a couple times to James, if this was a crossover die that was a fist shield, so that when I bought it, it would pay for its own global.
Mm-hmm.
Or when I Clayfaced it out, it would pay for its own global.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the big thing.
Yeah.
I can't Clayface Atlantis to pay for the Atlantis global.
Yeah.
If that was the case, or for our team, if the global involved a bolt instead of a fist or instead of a shield, like the old Star Labs global that this is a mimic of. If either of those were true, this card would stay on the team and be 100%.
Yep.
But because neither of those are true, it always feels a little clunky trying to use it. But by having it on the team, it lets me get out of the clutch situations, like the really hard, painful situations.
Yep. Yep, it has its place for sure. Okay, let's go on to the last card, which is Villainous Pact. If you don't know what it says, the global is pay a mask. Once per turn. Wow, it's hard to read. Once per turn on your turn, if you have no dice in your prep area, you may prep a die from your bag. And the action itself is also important. It's nice to see action dice where both the action and the global is important. Your opponent chooses 1 non-villain character die. All other non-villain character dice cannot block this turn. Go ahead, Patrick. Tell us how you abused that.
This card lets us hit our opponent. Both aspects of it let us hit our opponent for 10 damage, right? The prep global allows us to hit our opponent when we reset our bag on turn 2 so that we guarantee what we're going to draw on turn 3. Mm-hmm. That lets us be able to set up that hit our opponent for 10 or more combo by guaranteeing we have exactly what we need to punch our opponent in the face on turn 3.
Indeed, yes.
The other half is how we set up hitting our opponent for 10 more later. And that is, now we get to the point where we have 2 God Catchers in the field, and then we play Villainous Pact. And the Villainous Pact lets us get one of our God Catchers blocked and have our other God Catcher go through.
Yep.
Plus or minus God Catchers equal to the number of villain characters our opponent has in the field, right?
Yeah. There's not too much villains around these days, though.
No, villains are actually really dead in the meta, so this is why this is an acceptable win condition.
Mm-hmm.
The other reason Villainous Pact I prefer as a win condition for God Catcher is the more common God Catcher win condition right now is under surveillance, which I will talk about in a minute. But the reason Villainous Pact is better is because I can play Villainous Pact even if my God Catcher isn't in the field, and then my God Catcher will spawn and be able to attack my opponent. I cannot play under surveillance with no God Catchers in the field and still be able to hit my opponent for 10.
Yep. That does make sense. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the surprise on people's faces because Under Surveillance is pretty obvious, I think. Villainous Pact, not so much, because people very often have it on their team just for the global, and some people are not familiar with the action itself, and it's a good one, especially in this meta, as you say, with not so many villains. Okay, so that's the team. At this point, I'm going to switch over to my other scene, which should show you the whole team as it is, and we're just going to quickly go through a couple of nasties that you might face and what you might want to do about them if you're running this kind of team. And then, as I said before, we'll move on to a couple of alternate possibilities that Patrick might change something out for. So I don't know what the first one was, so let's just see. Let's click this button and see what the first one is. Static field. Okay. Static field, I reckon you've got it covered. What do you do about that?
I mean, that's a broadcast.
Yeah.
Yep. That's what it's here for, right?
Nothing more to say. that is the pain in the bum, but it's covered by Nefarious Broadcast. Yeah.
I mean, I will say there's another way to punish static field, and that is force attacking their mask characters off the field. They will quite often spend their masks to keep their guys back. And so by having that, okay, every time I spend a bolt on your turn, you have to use a mask that you were perhaps hoping to spend on my turn to stop me from hitting you. So then they have to start deciding, do they get rid of their character in the field or do they save the mask to stop me from hitting them?
Yep. Spug enjoyed that the other day when I did it to him.
Yeah. The downside is we bring Clayface, so they get quite a few masks. Mm-hmm. So it only works in like really bad roles for mask teams. Yeah. Is that, do they ever really feel that pressure? But being aware of being able to make that move is really important.
Yep. Okay. So Static field is dealt with mostly by Nefarious Broadcast. Let me find the right hotkey to move on to the next one. A little more difficult. Gazer, and I'll flick also to Yellow Lantern Ring. Both of these, and you mentioned also the Rock. And basically characters which have Intimidate are perhaps the Achilles heel of the God Catcher. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. In case anybody's not aware, tokens, when they leave play for any reason, are removed from the game. So they don't actually get intimidated. Intimidate becomes remove target token from game.
Yeah, it just goes
which
and disappears.
Right, which is super strong way to counter tokens. Okay. The Gazer only costing 2 is crazy strong intimidate ability. Yellow Lantern Ring, giving it to all of the sidekicks you rolled that turn, also really strong. I will say that this team is fast enough that by the time an opponent gets a Gazer out, you can either force attack the Gazer if the timing's right, or just swing with your Godcatcher and hope to hit him in the face for 10 once or twice. And so it becomes, if they're buying one Gazer to try and stop you, you can kind of outpace one Gazer, but the moment they buy the second one, you're kind of running even.
And if they're Ben Side Scott, then they buy 2 and field a whole hell of a lot of sidekicks and start to annoy the hell out.
Right, yeah. With Yellow Lantern Ring instead of Gazer, it kind of depends on how many cheap characters they have. Mm-hmm. I've seen some Yellow Lantern Ring teams that only have 4-cost characters, like their only 2-cost card is Yellow Lantern Ring. Mm-hmm. In which case, I would still go Godcatcher against that, and just hope they don't get enough sidekicks on the right time. But if they have another 2-cost character to pair alongside Yellow Lantern Ring, or if they're doing Yellow Lantern Ring and Yawning Portal to ramp into a bajillion guys, just what you do is you buy your Storm and you buy your Nefarious Broadcast to kind of slow them down, and you bluff them into thinking that you're still going Godcatcher, and they get that Yellow Lantern Ring, and they start buying those like cheap characters and Gazers, and then you're like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm going to Supreme Intelligence this Storm over, and next turn I'm going to buy a 6-cost Thor, and then resurrect. Hope you don't mind, because now I have a Storm and a Thor, and I'm just like, fielding my cheap 2-cost bolt character that if you block her, she dies and gets fielded again, and if you don't block her, you take 3 damage. So,
yep, pretty good. What's next? Oh, okay. So we can skip through these because Drax and Spider-Man and Typhoid Mary, I left them all in because they're common control pieces in the meta, but they don't do anything. Not a thing to Godcatcher.
I would actually even argue that Spider-Man helps you.
How did he do that?
Because either they spin down one of your sidekicks, in which case you get that extra 1 energy, which you can Supreme Intelligence with, or Atlantis with,
yep.
Or Clayface with, right? Like they could even give you a mask, and then you just Clayface something. Basically, all the energy they can give you can turn out poorly for them. Because Supreme Intelligence is generic, right? So even giving you 1 more energy just makes using that Supreme Intelligence 1 cheaper, 1 easier to do. So I would argue that Spider-Man actually helps the Godcatcher team by giving you extra energy during your opponent's turn to ramp harder.
Yeah. Well, both Drax and Typhoid Mary refer to characters, so they're not going to directly interact with the Godcatcher. But Typhoid Mary, they could blank your Supreme Intelligence.
They could blank my Supreme Intelligence. They could blank my Clayface. They could blank my Thor. But honestly, if I were them, if they don't blank my Scott Hall, they're doing it wrong.
Which is kind of a waste of time, really, because if you're just buying her just so you can blank Scott Hall, I mean, sure, you can't force attack some other nasties, but they've paid 4 and achieved. Well, they've not progressed their win con much, that's for sure.
And in exchange, I bought a Villainous Pact. So you having the extra blocker on the Typhoid Mary and me not being able to force your other blockers off doesn't help them. And lo and behold, Typhoid Mary's not even a villain.
No, that's weird, isn't it?
If she was a villain, it'd be a great purchase because you're adding an extra blocker against Villainous Pact and preventing me from thinning your blockers normally. But she's not even a villain.
Okay, well, I'll tell you someone who is not a villain but is more of a problem is Becky Lynch, Maiden Island. I'm pretty sure everybody knows what this does. It's got a prep global. Pay a shield. The first die you purchase this turn is added to your prep area instead of your use pile. She has Overcrush, she has magical stats, and she has the Storm ability where when she's fielded, she rerolls 2 character dice. But that's not so important with Godcatcher, to be fair. But it is with the sidekicks that you might want to field to thin your bag, and also the Overcrush that is often paired with the Force Block Global and the Jerry Lawler Global. You don't really want to be leaving sidekicks in the field very much.
Well, I will say the biggest problem with Becky Lynch is the fact that she often comes with a Force Block and a double attack or double stats global. And her minimum stats are 5/5. So she can kill a Godcatcher, and then she's rolling back the next turn, but your Godcatcher token isn't. You have to wait for the die to cycle again, right? So the fact that she can trade up on Godcatchers is her greatest strength. On top of she can absolutely murder you and win you the game by hitting. We talked about how many times does she need to hit, right? Well, she needs to hit 2 or 3 times.
Yep.
At level 1, she'll need to hit you 3 times. At level 2,
assuming
she'll need to hit you only twice.
Because if she's going straight through, then it would be three times to an empty field on the top face and 4 times on the bottom face. But so the thing is, there's a real, or at least I have this feeling that I shouldn't leave anything in the field, especially not sidekicks, because they can be forced to blocker, and then, as I say, they use the Jerry Lawler Global on the top face. That's going to be 15 damage going through, which which hurts. And if you can't feel the sidekicks, then you're not getting them out of circulation, which means your Godcatcher team slows down. And also, if you're not fielding sidekicks, you've got and you just got Godcatcher tokens. God forbid that you don't manage to trigger them with another action die, then you're just open to being finished off with a level 1 Becky and a few sidekicks.
Agreed completely to all of that. Yeah. To be honest, when I designed this team, I had never played one game against a Becky team. That's it. So the amount of strategy and theory crafting I have against highly competitive Becky teams for this team is pretty low. I will say most Becky teams don't have an answer to take 10 on the third turn. So if this team can get that off, if it can hit your opponent for 10 on the first turn, then the Becky team has to be a little bit more defensive. Yep. And you can start swinging with storms every turn, just to like, oh, you're at 10 every time you don't block a storm, you take 3, right? And I'll get you there sooner than later.
Yeah.
Or you can hit with a really early Godcatcher and then transition into Thor, right? And start.
Then you have to try and keep Thor in the field with Becky, which is a thing. Her sending
Perhaps.
stuff to the used pile.
Or I guess arguably you could transition into Hawkeyes, and then Hawkeye dies if they block him, right? Like on almost every level, Hawkeye dies if they block him.
Yeah.
So that's another option as well.
It's tough. I think it can be tough if your opponent, like, if your opponent's Ben and he clearly knows what he's doing. If they manage to get...
well, I mean, the game I lost other than to you was also against a Becky team, but it was more than just one Becky team. It was a Becky team
with Gazer.
No, it was a Becky team that had planned to buy my own Godcatchers and beat me with them.
Oh, how was it? Was it Peter by any chance?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Bless him.
So Peter came prepared for not only with a Becky team to see if he could kill me with a Becky team, which he ended up doing, but he also went with the strategy of, can I buy your Godcatchers and use them against you? And that is legitimately a weakness of this team, is that instead of bringing Clayface on your team, if you fear this team specifically, and this is what Peter did, if you fear this team specifically, take your Clayface off your team and put the 3-cost Godcatcher on.
Yeah.
And then buy Godcatchers and use all of my 7 globals against me.
Exactly. Yes. And you deserve it.
Yeah. I mean, he deserved that win. Absolutely.
What's the next one? Yes, Thor. You wanted to.
I already kind of talked about it.
Yeah.
You're not a Thor team, so against Thor you need a Godcatcher, and against a Thor that has a Godcatcher counter on it, good luck.
Indeed. Big E. Big E was while Big E is active, any combat damage to you that is more than 2 is reduced to 2.
So force attack, hopefully, right?
That's the answer to that one, I think.
Otherwise, set up a really big Villainous Pact that has you can also attack every turn with just one Godcatcher and kill the Big E and wait for the turn that he doesn't reroll.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then this team can set up a really thin bag and a really smooth field so that you're drawing your Villainous Pact every turn, right? And so you're just waiting for the Big E to miss and then landing your Villainous Pact.
Yep.
Or waiting for them to miss masks so that you can force attack the Big E off the field before you swing.
It's not a bad counter though, is it? With Big E with static field, which presumably would be there, since that either that or Becky with Gazer and sidekicks. Those I think are your and obviously people using your globals against you. Those are the things that are going to beat this Godcatcher team, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And none of those are 100% counters to this team, because sometimes this team just does 20 damage on turn 3.
Yeah. Yes, I enjoy
right?
that.
and that's the thing is if this team gets its ideal, it wins. Not it's ahead, it just wins on turn 3. Whereas many of the other teams that are out there, if they get an ideal start, they're still not winning until turns 4, 5, or 6. Yeah. And that means that this team can line up a oh, well, I got almost ideal, so I'll win on turn 4 instead.
We should say to the people who are retching into their teacups at the idea of a turn 3 win, that indeed is a whole other discussion, and a perfectly valid one, but not one that we're going to have now. Should we be punishing people on turn 3? Well, if it makes you feel any better, I did it to Patrick in the last game of the tournament on Saturday, so take that vicarious
I get my own dose of medicine, and I'm happy about it.
Okay. Okay, I think we're just going to quickly talk about some other possibilities that you might consider swapping out on the team. So I think we're done with counters. This is Arnim Zola is the next card up, and this is the card that you had on in the previous tournament in the place where Storm was on this team. So in the mirror match, Arnim Zola is actually really good. For 2 reasons. One, he can block a Godcatcher, and for 1 energy, he stays in the field to block a Godcatcher another time, which is pretty great. They force attack him. He's got decent stats, both top and bottom. And 2, he's a villain. Yeah. So Villainous Pact doesn't work against him. Yep. Like, my cheapest character stops your win condition card. So in the mirror match, he's really strong. So that's Arnim. Another possibility in the same spot, I suspect, if I can press the right button, is Grell. This is what I put on my team on Saturday. It's a nice 2-cost with okay fielding, and it's got deadly, so I thought it might be useful if I bought it against a Godcatcher team, because again, if the Godcatcher token gets knocked out, it just goes poof and ceases to exist. So that means you have to cycle the die in order to get the character back in the field. His stat line's a little weaker than Storm's, but otherwise still threatens the same attack. And he costs a little more. But I felt that if he wasn't actively advancing my win condition, like what Storm does, then he needed to actively advance my actively hamper my opponent's win conditions. And as good as he is with Deadly, he does not actively prevent my opponent from lining up a Villainous Pact and killing me, right? Yeah. Whereas Arnim did, because he was a villain, my opponent just wouldn't go until they had enough. So Grell doesn't do anything at that point. Right. Yeah, I didn't. Sorry. Go. No, he's still a great choice. And if you have him and don't have the others, then play him. He's perfect for the team. I was impressed when you chose him. I just chose the other 2 for an additional reason besides what he slots in as. Yeah, I quite fancy that Storm. That whole thing with the Clayface and Storm, I think is quite cool. What's next? My battery really is about to die. So, I think the thing that we wanted to mention really was, or one thing I wanted to mention. If I did this differently, I probably would take out Atlantis and replace it with Atlas. And I would take out Villainous Pact and replace it with Under Surveillance. In spite of all the cool things that you can do with Villainous Pact, I sometimes found the fact that you couldn't have any dice in your prep area if you wanted to prep with Villainous Pact. Not so much the prepping as the resetting of the bag. It sometimes conflicted with, for example, Supreme Intelligence, or the Atlantis. The putting things in your prep area is sometimes a bit of a restriction. Or even Becky. It counteracts Becky a lot sometimes, and because sometimes you want to buy 2 things. One, Becky's going to put 1 in, and then you can't Villainous Pact to put the other one and reset your bag. Part of the reason is I like that. It's not great for those Becky teams. But the other thing, we already talked about it, Under Surveillance versus Villainous Pact. I can play Villainous Pact and Godcatcher will come out, and then I can swing with it and still have blockers removed. Whereas if I play Under Surveillance, I have to target a sidekick in order to get the Godcatcher to come out. Yeah, that is a critical difference. Fair enough. Okay. Do we have any more cards? Do we have Iron Lad? Oh, I was supposed to. No, I'm pressing the wrong button. We have Intellect Devourer. Which why give our opponent energy fixing
we're not making enough sidekicks to use it, and it just makes other teams too reliable. And I don't think it's better than anything we have on our team, except possibly Atlantis, but it synergizes with Atlantis, so I'd rather have Atlantis.
Fair enough. And finally, before my battery really does die and we lose the entire recording, we have Iron Lad. Ooh, phew, we're back. I just almost lost the entire recording due to running out of battery, but luckily Windows has some sort of hibernate which avoided that eventuality, so thank goodness for that. We are actually on the last card, so Patrick, tell us about Iron Lad.
So I was looking for economy globals that we could put in that were bolts, right? Because this is a bolt team.
Mm-hmm.
And Iron Lad is a prep global that it uses a bolt, and it seems perfect for this team.
Yep,
but
it does. It doesn't seem to.
One of the biggest counters to our team is static field,
mm-hmm.
and I cannot swing with a sidekick and prep with Iron Lad if they static field my sidekick back so it deals 0 damage, right? You have to be able to connect 4 damage with something. If they have no sidekicks in the field, if they static field back everything, they can spend their energy, and mask teams have more energy than you do.
Yep.
You are not going to out-econ a mask team. So mask teams will be able to push you back and keep you out. And one of the big things is you need that turn 3 win condition to like really win out the statistical numbers. And to do that, you need to be able to reset your bag on demand
mm-hmm.
at exactly the right time. And Iron Lad prevents you from doing that.
Yes, it does.
It's a great device. Like, to be honest, 2 bolts and a sidekick in the field lets you guarantee Iron Lad, right? Because you can pay a bolt to ping the sidekick and then pay a bolt to Iron Lad, and then you will guarantee to set it up. But that is, you have to roll a sidekick, or you have to roll a shield or a fist to make a sidekick, and then you are prepping the sidekick. So you're really going to net like 3 or 4 dice in the prep area, which is great econ, but it took you 4 dice to get there.
Yeah, it's not necessarily that efficient, but the worst thing is that at clutch moments, what you really want to do, you don't care about so much about the ramp, but you do care about resetting your bag. And if you can't do it when you need to do it, then that's just not going to wash. I don't think. Yeah, I tried out Iron Lad at your suggestion, and I just found him. I found him wanting at critical moments.
Exactly.
Okay, Patrick, I've recovered from some sort of the massive shock of almost losing an hour's worth of recording. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I hope that has been educational for our listeners and watchers indeed, since this is YouTube, as it has been for me. Good luck with everything, and I hope to have you back again with some other monstrous mutation.
I mean, here's hoping. The Hope Summers and Jean Grey that makes everything cost 2 more to field is looking pretty miraculous.
That's like the opposite of this team. Oh, oof, no. Okay. Okay. Well, once you've done it, I would be honoured to have you back on, Patrick. Thank you again, and thank you everybody for watching, and see you again soon. Bye bye.